For years, officers Briggs and Reynolds thought they were untouchable. They harassed, humiliated, and brutalized without fear of consequence. They believed their power shielded them from accountability, until one day, their arrogance led them to stop two unarmed black brothers, Malcolm and Isaiah Carter. When one of the twins, Malcolm, refused to be treated like a criminal, the officers escalated, turning words into threats and threats into violence. When Malcolm moved, they shot him dead. Isaiah, beaten and handcuffed, was forced to watch his brother bleed out on the pavement. Now, Isaiah Carter, a Delta Force operative with a score to settle, is coming for them. The officers thought their version of events would dominate. They thought the system would shield them, as it always had. But this time, the system won't protect them. Isaiah is coming for his vengeance, and nothing will stop him. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. The engine hummed beneath them as the sleek black Dodge Charger rolled through the quiet streets, its polished frame reflecting the golden glow of streetlights. Inside, Malcolm sat behind the wheel, his fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel, his sharp gaze flicking between the road and his brother, Isaiah. Isaiah sat relaxed in the passenger seat, arm resting against the window, eyes scanning the well-maintained lawns and perfectly trimmed hedges passing by in uniform rows. Ever notice how all these neighborhoods look the same? Malcolm mused, shaking his head. Every house, practically identical, like someone just copy-pasted the whole block. Isaiah smirked. Ava liked it when she bought the place, said it felt safe. Safe? Malcolm scoffed, rolling his eyes. It sure feels safe when you live here. But for us, you think they see two black men in a Charger at this hour and just assume we're visiting family? Isaiah sighed, already knowing where this was going. Malcolm, don't start. I'm just saying, Malcolm continued, his grip tightening on the wheel. We're driving through one of the richest neighborhoods in the city, and you know damn well we're going to get side-eyed for it. Isaiah rubbed his temple. I'm not doing this tonight. It's been a long month. I just want to have dinner with Ava and not think about any of this. Malcolm exhaled sharply, his jaw tight, but he didn't push the point further. He let the silence settle between them as the houses passed in perfect symmetry, each one lit just enough to highlight their exclusivity. Just as Malcolm was about to shift the conversation, Isaiah's gaze flicked to the rearview mirror, his posture subtly shifting. Cop car, he muttered. Malcolm didn't react at first, just kept driving, but his grip on the wheel tightened. The cruiser rolled past, slowing just enough for its occupants to get a good look at them. Neither brother turned their heads, but they both felt it. The weight of being noticed, the unspoken calculation happening behind them. Then came the unmistakable sound of a U-turn. Malcolm let out a humorless chuckle, eyes still fixed ahead. Right on schedule, Isaiah exhaled slowly, his voice steady but firm. Mal, just keep driving normal. Yeah, Malcolm muttered, like that matters. The blue and red lights flared to life behind them, and the unmistakable siren cut through the stillness of the night. Malcolm flicked on the turn signal, easing the Charger to a stop at the curb, making sure they didn't give them any reason to claim they weren't cooperating. The world outside was eerily quiet, except for the faint rustling of leaves and the distant hum of a lawn sprinkler. Isaiah shifted in his seat, facing his brother. Let me do the talking. Malcolm's jaw twitched. Yeah, and what's that going to change? It's not about changing anything, Isaiah said, his voice calm but firm. It's about getting to Ava in one piece. Malcolm didn't answer, just stared straight ahead, his nostrils flaring. Slowly, he placed his hands on the wheel, fingers spread wide, ensuring they were visible. Isaiah mirrored him, placing his hands on the dashboard, movements deliberate, controlled. They had both been here before. They knew the script. Footsteps crunched against the pavement as two figures approached the car. A flashlight beam swept across the interior, pausing for just a moment longer than necessary on their faces. Then came the voice, gruff, authoritative, carrying the unspoken certainty that this wasn't just a routine stop. License and registration. Malcolm didn't move, his expression blank, but Isaiah was already reaching for the glove compartment. His movements were slow, exaggerated for the sake of appearances. "It's in here," he said evenly, looking up at the officer. His tone was neutral, measured. No sudden movements, no agitation. They knew the rules. They had been forced to learn the rules the hard way. The second officer lingered near Malcolm's window, his gaze sharp and inspecting. "Where are you two headed tonight?" he demanded. Isaiah, focused on the first officer, handed over the documents without looking away, his voice calm. "We're on our way to our sister's house, a few blocks up." The officer glanced at the IDs without acknowledging the answer, his posture shifting slightly. Then, Officer Briggs stepped closer to Malcolm's window, his eyes narrowing. "Step out of the car," he ordered. Malcolm took a slow breath, his fingers tightening around the wheel for just a fraction of a second. "Why?" he asked, his voice flat. Briggs didn't flinch. "Because I said so." A muscle in Malcolm's jaw twitched, but before he could respond, Isaiah spoke up. "Officer, can we ask why we're being stopped?" The first officer, Reynolds, spoke this time, his tone matter of fact. "There have been reports of break-ins in the neighborhood. You match the description." Malcolm scoffed, a humorless laugh escaping his lips. "Oh yeah? What's that description? Black and breathing?" Isaiah's pulse quickened, but he stayed composed. Briggs's voice was colder now. "I said, step out of the car." Isaiah turned to Reynolds, his voice steady. "We're both military officers, Delta Force. Our IDs are right there. We're just trying to visit our sister. We're not looking for trouble." Briggs scoffed. "That right. Then you shouldn't have a problem stepping out." The tension in the car became almost unbearable. Every second seemed to drag, the air thick with unspoken words. Malcolm exhaled sharply, eyes locked on Briggs. Every fiber of his being screamed to push back, but Isaiah was still looking at him, silently urging him to stay calm. Malcolm clenched his jaw, and after a beat, slowly reached for the door handle. As soon as it clicked open, Briggs' hand hovered near his holster. The air around them suddenly charged with a dangerous energy. The door opened with a soft click, barely audible over the growing tension. Malcolm stepped out first, slow and deliberate, his every move controlled. He stood just a few inches taller than the officer, his hands visible at his sides, fingers slightly spread, a silent acknowledgement of the invisible rules men like him had to follow. Isaiah followed, his movements mirroring his brother's, positioning himself just slightly ahead, protective but not confrontational. The night air felt colder now, or maybe it was the edge of something darker pressing in. The officers remained still, their hands resting just a little too comfortably near their belts, watching the twins with a scrutiny that spoke of suspicion rather than protocol. "Turn around. Hands on the car," Briggs ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. Malcolm didn't move, his jaw tight, nostrils flaring, his fingers curled slightly. "For what?" His voice was sharp, but not raised. Not yet. He knew better. But the weight of his frustration was simmering just below the surface. Briggs raised an eyebrow, his lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smirk, but carried the same quiet arrogance. "Because I said so." Isaiah, already anticipating where this was headed, lifted a hand slightly, not in surrender, but as a request for calm. His voice was measured, practiced. "Look, officer," he started, his tone controlled and steady. "We're both Delta Force. We understand protocol. If this is a routine stop, we've given you our IDs. You can check them. See, we're exactly who we say we are. We don't want any trouble. We're just trying to see our sister." Briggs gave a slow nod, his eyes narrowing slightly before reaching for the IDs Isaiah had handed over. He flicked on his flashlight, letting the artificial glow skim over the laminated cards as Reynolds stepped in beside him, peering over his shoulder. The two men exchanged a look, barely noticeable, but Isaiah caught it. "Out of town," Briggs muttered, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Neither of you live here." Malcolm let out a low, humorless chuckle, shaking his head. "That's what we told you. We're visiting our sister." Briggs ignored him, flipping the ID over before glancing up again. "So, let me get this straight. You expect me to believe that two guys with an address across the city just happened to be driving through this neighborhood in this car at this hour because your sister lives here?" Isaiah exhaled slowly through his nose, forcing himself to remain calm. "Yes, that's exactly what we're telling you, because it's the truth." Reynolds, who had remained quiet until now, shifted slightly. The light from Briggs's flashlight cast deep shadows across his face. His voice was low, dripping with implication. "Yeah? And what does your sister do to afford a place around here?" Isaiah stiffened, his eyes locking onto Reynolds in that brief, unspoken exchange. The implication was clear, even if it wasn't stated outright. "A black woman living in this neighborhood?" The suggestion hung in the air, suffocating. Malcolm's patience snapped. His lips parted, a sharp breath escaping his mouth. "Excuse me?" Reynolds held his gaze, unflinching, as if daring him to challenge it. "Just saying. Not a lot of people from your side of town end up in places like this without a good reason." Isaiah stepped forward, his body moving just enough to physically block his brother's path. "She's a lawyer," he said, his voice sharper now, clipped. "Graduated top of her class. Works for one of the biggest firms in the city. Is that a good enough reason for you?" Briggs let out a slow exhale, the tension thick in the air. Briggs tilted his head slightly as he studied them both, as if weighing their words, their worth. Then, without another comment, he turned to walk back toward his squad car. Isaiah exhaled quietly, thinking, just maybe, this could de-escalate. But then Briggs stopped, turning slightly over his shoulder. "Stay where you are," he muttered, disappearing inside his vehicle. Isaiah could hear the faint crackle of radio static, the murmur of indistinct voices, a background check. They were running them through the system. "They're stalling," Malcolm muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "Running our names like we're goddamn criminals." Isaiah didn't respond right away, just kept his eyes on the officers, his hands loose at his sides, but ready. They were pushing, looking for a reason, an excuse, something to justify whatever was already forming in their minds. "Let's just keep cool," Isaiah murmured, though even he could feel the control slipping, the space for logic narrowing. Malcolm turned slightly toward him, his voice low, edged. "You think that's going to change a damn thing?" Before Isaiah could answer, Briggs returned, his face unreadable, but his presence now carrying something heavier, more resolute. He stepped back toward them, the flashlight still in his hand, and gestured. "All right," he said, his tone sharp. "Hands on the car, both of you." Isaiah took a slow breath, bracing himself. "Come on, man. We gave you everything, everything you asked for. You know exactly who we are, where we're going. What are you still looking for?" Briggs didn't waver. He stepped closer to the car, and Malcolm didn't move. Briggs's hand hovered near his holster. Isaiah saw it happening in slow motion, the shift in posture, the way the air seemed to thicken, the silent understanding of what was about to come. If they didn't comply, things would escalate quickly. Isaiah's breath caught for just a second, but then, with slow, reluctant motion, Isaiah turned and placed his hands on the cool metal of the Charger's hood. Malcolm hesitated a moment longer before reluctantly following suit. The moment his hands touched the car, Briggs grabbed his wrist, and Isaiah saw the first real flash of emotion break across Malcolm's face, a sharp flicker of something primal, something furious. That was all it took. The spark had been lit. The night was about to ignite. The cold metal of the Charger's hood pressed against Malcolm's palms, the rough texture biting into his skin. Briggs's hands moved with unnecessary force over his back, pressing hard against his ribs before sliding lower. The pressure wasn't just about the search, it was meant to provoke, to remind them who was in control. The weight of the moment settled over them, thick and suffocating. The air was sharp with the unspoken tension of a game that had already been rigged against them before it even began. "Spread your legs wider," Briggs muttered, his tone clipped and edged with arrogance that sent a hot pulse of anger straight through Malcolm's chest. Malcolm exhaled sharply, adjusting his stance just enough to avoid giving them anything they could twist into non-compliance. His fingers curled slightly over the hood. "Man, come on," he muttered, his voice low, brimming with frustration. "Ain't like I got a damn arsenal on me." Briggs didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge him, just continued the search. His hands pressed rougher now, shoving at Malcolm's pockets, his grip tightening like he was waiting for resistance. "You got a problem?" Briggs asked, his breath close now, deliberate, as his fingers dug into Malcolm's arm. Malcolm shifted slightly, muscles tensing beneath the touch. "Yeah, I got a problem. My problem is some punk throwing me up against my own damn car like I just knocked over a damn convenience store." Briggs' grip tightened, and Isaiah could feel the shift in the air before the words even fully registered. This was it, the moment the officers had been waiting for. "Mal," Isaiah warned, his voice tense but controlled, his eyes darting toward his brother with an urgency that was more than just a plea. It was survival. Briggs let out a slow, amused breath. "Listen to your brother, boy," he muttered. The words slid out of his mouth like venom, slow and deliberate, meant to cut deep. The night snapped. Malcolm jerked, twisting slightly, his head snapping toward Briggs, his breath sharp, his entire body coiled like a loaded spring. Isaiah moved instantly, pressing forward, his shoulder against Malcolm's, physically blocking him before the last thread of restraint could break. "Malcolm, stop." Isaiah's voice was steady but laced with urgency, his hands raised slightly in a placating motion. "Not here. Not now." But Malcolm's breath was already coming too hard, too fast. His nostrils flared, his fingers flexing at his sides. His instincts were screaming at him, demanding that he fight back, that he refused to let them turn him into a victim. Briggs tilted his head, smirking just enough to let them know he'd already won. "That's what I thought," he murmured. Then, slow and deliberate, he reached for his belt. Isaiah's pulse quickened. "Spiked," Briggs said, pulling out his handcuffs, letting the metal glint under the streetlight. "We're detaining you both while we confirm your story." Isaiah stepped forward, his voice firm. "Detained for what?" Briggs shrugged. "Resisting a lawful search, possible obstruction, hell, maybe even suspicion of intent. We got plenty of reasons." "That's a lie," Malcolm snapped, jerking away the moment Briggs reached for him. And that was all they needed. Briggs latched onto Malcolm's arm, yanking him toward the car with unnecessary force, his shoulder wrenching forward at an awkward angle. Malcolm instinctively twisted, trying to regain his balance. In that split second, Reynolds stepped in, gripping Malcolm's other arm and pushing against his back, trying to force him down. Isaiah reached for Malcolm's shoulder, trying to stabilize him. "Just go with it, man. Let go of me!" Malcolm barked, his voice cracking with raw frustration. He had been through this too many times, humiliated enough to know where this would lead. He wasn't fighting, he wasn't attacking, he was reacting, but that didn't matter to them. Briggs shoved hard. Malcolm staggered. "He's resisting!" Briggs shouted, his voice already changing, twisting reality into a lie. Reynolds pulled back his hand, moving quickly to his belt. "He's got a weapon." Isaiah saw it happen before it even did. The words were still hanging in the air when Briggs reached for his gun. His movements were rehearsed, practiced, as if he had been waiting for this moment to make the call. Malcolm twisted one last time, breath sharp, teeth bared, and then The gunshot cracked the air open. Malcolm jerked violently, his entire body snapping backward, his chest arching before his knees gave out beneath him. His breath hitched, a sound halfway between shock and disbelief, before he crumpled onto the pavement. Isaiah's scream tore through the night. "Malcolm!" He moved without thinking, lunging toward his brother, but before he could reach him, a white-hot explosion of pain surged through his chest. The taser hit him full force, electricity ripping through his body, locking his muscles into place, stealing the breath from his lungs. His legs gave out, his vision swimming as he hit the ground. "Officer down! He tried to grab my gun!" Briggs was screaming now, frantic, but Isaiah could hear the lie in it. The premeditation, the way the story was already being molded into the version they would tell. "Backup needed," Reynolds echoed, his voice high and breathless. His hand still gripped the smoking gun. Isaiah fought against the paralysis gripping his limbs, his vision blurry, his ears still ringing. He tried to push himself up, his body rebelling against him. His eyes found Malcolm, his brother lying sprawled just feet away, his chest barely rising. His fingers twitched weakly, his mouth parting slightly as if trying to say something. Isaiah dragged himself forward, his body screaming against the movement. "Malcolm! Hold on, man!" Malcolm coughed, a wet, ragged sound. His fingers weakly grasped at the air before finding Isaiah's arm, gripping with what little strength he had left. His lips trembled as his breath hitched. His eyes searched Isaiah's with something heavy, something Isaiah didn't want to understand. "Isaiah." Malcolm's voice barely came, choked, strained, each word a fight. His fingers dug weakly into Isaiah's sleeve. "I'm sorry." Isaiah's breath shattered. No, don't." His voice broke. His hand pressed over Malcolm's wound as if he could force time to reverse, to undo what had already been set in motion. Isaiah's hands trembled as he pressed down on the warmth spreading across his brother's chest. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. His heart slammed against his ribs so hard it felt like his entire body might shatter beneath the weight of what was happening. Malcolm's body twitched weakly beneath him, his fingers barely moving, the warmth of life slipping away faster than Isaiah could hold it together. "Malcolm, stay with me, man," Isaiah begged, his voice cracking under the force of his own panic. The words came too fast, too desperate. "Come on, man, you're good. You're good, you hear me? Just breathe, just—" His voice broke again as Malcolm's eyes fluttered, barely open. His lips parted, but no real sound came out. "Malcolm, please!" Isaiah choked, his hands pressing harder against the wound, as if he could force his brother's life to stay inside his body, as if sheer desperation alone could undo the horror spilling out between his fingers. "Look at me, man. Just look at me," Isaiah urged. "You ain't going nowhere. You hear me? You're not—" Malcolm let out a weak, wheezing breath, his fingers twitching against Isaiah's sleeve, grasping barely, holding on. His lips moved, voice nothing more than a whisper, broken and trembling. "Don't let them—" Malcolm coughed, his body seizing under the pain. His fingers tightened with what little strength he had left. "Don't let them. Get away with this!" Isaiah's breath hitched, his vision swimming with hot, stinging tears as he grasped onto his brother's hands, squeezing them, refusing to let go. "No, don't! Don't say that! You hear me? You're not dying, man! You're not! You can't—" Then came the voices. "Get off him!" Hands wrenched at the back of Isaiah's jacket, tearing him away with a violent yank that sent him sprawling backward. His knees scraped against the pavement as he fought against them, his arms clawing forward, trying to hold on to Malcolm. No, please!" A sharp blow slammed into his ribs, white-hot pain exploding through his body. Body ached, but the pain felt distant, almost as if it belonged to someone else. His mind refused to settle, replaying the final moments with Malcolm over and over like a haunting loop. The harsh sound of the squad car's engine only added to the suffocating silence inside, a silence that seemed to echo louder than the chaos he had just left behind. Malcolm's blood, so thick and dark against the pavement, kept flashing in his mind, a stark reminder of what he had lost. The weight of his brother's absence pressed down on him like a physical force, each breath a reminder of how everything had gone wrong. Isaiah's body was stiff, his movements sluggish, as if the very act of being alive was too much to bear. He tried to focus on his breathing, but the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest did little to calm the storm raging inside him. The blood was still fresh in his mind, and no amount of deep breaths could erase the image of his brother's lifeless body lying in the street, vulnerable and abandoned. Through the fog of his thoughts, he could hear the faint murmur of voices outside the car. He didn't know if they were speaking to him or to each other, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered now except the emptiness that swirled around him, gnawing at him from the inside. His hands were still tightly cuffed behind his back, the metal biting into his skin, but the pain was muted by the crushing weight of the loss. The world outside was a blur, but the image of Briggs, calm, composed, walking past the window as if he had just completed another task, etched itself into his mind. How could he just walk away from what had happened? How could they? The door slammed shut, and the world became even more suffocating. Inside the car, Isaiah's eyes were drawn to the small, smeared patch of glass where, for just a moment, he could see Malcolm's body one last time. The officers had already moved on, but Malcolm remained, alone. Tears welled in Isaiah's eyes, but he fought them back. He wasn't going to break down, not now. He couldn't. But the pain was unbearable, the overwhelming grief mixing with a fury that threatened to consume him. He clenched his fists so tightly that his nails dug into his palms, and for a split second, the pressure of it almost felt like a release. Don't let them get away with this. Those were the last words Malcolm had spoken, whispered through his pain and fear, and Isaiah promised himself, right then and there, that he would make sure they didn't. He would make sure the world knew the truth. The world would hear his brother's name, and the injustice would not be forgotten. The night passed in fragmented moments, the red and blue lights flashing in the distance, indistinct voices shouting orders, the harsh grip of the cuffs cutting into his wrists. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, asphalt, and blood, a scent that would haunt him forever. At some point, the squad car started moving, but Isaiah didn't feel it. He didn't feel the movement of the car or the passage of time. The streets outside blurred together, neon signs streaking past the window like memories fading into the night. Everything felt unreal, a distorted dream he couldn't escape from. The pain in his chest, sharp, raw, was the only thing that kept him tethered to reality. And as the car drove farther away from the scene, away from Malcolm, away from the only family he had left, the reality of it all set in. Malcolm was gone, and Isaiah hadn't been able to stop it. He didn't know how long they drove, how long he sat there, numb, unable to move, unable to breathe properly. His body was a cage, his mind a maze of pain and rage. But through it all, the one thing that burned in his chest like a fire was the promise he had made, to never let them get away with it. He would make sure of it, no matter the cost. Isaiah's muscles locked so tight, his entire body felt like it might snap under the pressure. His mind kept looping back, dragging him to the last time he and Malcolm had been in a car together, just hours earlier. They'd been laughing about the identical houses in a neighborhood that was never made for them. Ava liked it when she bought the place, said it felt safe. Safe. A choked, bitter sound pressed against the back of his throat, but it never made it past his lips. The weight of grief was too thick, too heavy, coiling around his ribs like a steel vise. His head tipped back against the seat, his gaze unfocused, his thoughts slipping into the past like water through trembling fingers. He and Malcolm had always been together, always, from the moment they were born, side by side. their mother holding them close, whispering their names like they were meant to be spoken in the same breath. Malcolm and Isaiah, Isaiah and Malcolm. They had fought together, laughed together, bled together. They had survived as kids, learning young what it meant to be feared before they were even old enough to understand why. They had learned to keep their hands visible in convenience stores, to stay still when a cop car rolled by, to smile just enough to seem unthreatening but not so much that it looked forced. They had learned to control their anger, to bury it deep, to push it down so far that it couldn't be used against them. But Malcolm had never been able to push it far enough. Isaiah had always been the one to step in, the one to keep him grounded, the one to pull him back when the world tried to push him too far. But this one time, he hadn't been fast enough. He hadn't been strong enough. He hadn't saved him. He squeezed his eyes shut, his head pounding, his hands curling into fists behind him. It should have been him. If he had just stepped in sooner, if he had just kept Malcolm from speaking, from moving, from breathing too freely in a space that was never meant for them. The car slowed, turning sharply, and the sudden motion yanked him out of his thoughts. His eyes opened, his breath catching as the reality of the moment crashed back into him. The precinct loomed ahead, its fluorescent lights buzzing against the night, sterile and indifferent. The car rolled to a stop, and then hands were on him again, dragging him forward, forcing his body upright as his legs struggled to catch up with the movement. His feet stumbled against the pavement as they hauled him out of the car. The shift in motion sent another wave of dizziness crashing over him, his ribs throbbing, his skull still aching from where he had been slammed into the ground. But the officers didn't slow, didn't care. The inside of the station was just as harsh. White tile, dull overhead lights, the scent of sweat and coffee thick in the air. He was shoved forward, past rows of desks, past officers who barely even looked up as he was dragged through the booking process. Barely more than a body, barely even a person. They took his fingerprints, his mugshot. They took everything. And through it all, he said nothing. Not because he had nothing to say, but because none of it mattered. Malcolm was dead. They had won. Time passed in a haze. Isaiah didn't know how long he had been sitting there, his body slumped in a hard plastic chair, his hands cuffed to the table in front of him, his head hanging low, his breathing shallow, his thoughts tangled in something too thick, too dark to pull himself out of it. Then the door creaked open. Isaiah barely reacted, his body too heavy, too exhausted, the weight of his grief sinking so deep he wasn't sure he could ever climb out of it. Then, Isaiah. The voice snapped through him like a jolt of electricity. His head lifted. Ava stood in the doorway, her eyes wide, her chest heaving. Her entire body radiated something sharp, something barely contained. Her hands trembled as she stepped forward, taking in the bruises blooming along his jaw, the dried blood crusting at the corner of his mouth, the way his wrists were still bound to the table like he was the criminal. For a moment, she said nothing. Then her breath hitched, and her face twisted into something Isaiah had never seen before. Something shattered. And Isaiah realized she already knew. The weight of it crushed him all over again. Ava stood in the doorway, her breath shallow, her fingers curled into fists at her sides as she took in the sight of her brother. His head bowed, his wrists shackled to the table, his entire body slumped with the weight of something she couldn't even begin to put into words. Isaiah barely moved. He sat there, still as stone, his chest rising and falling in slow, uneven breaths. His face was bruised, dark splotches blooming along his jaw and beneath his right eye, his knuckles raw, dried blood still crusted at the corner of his mouth. His clothes were stained, dirt, sweat, and something darker smudging the fabric. But none of that was what made Ava's stomach twist into knots. It was his eyes. They were empty. Ava swallowed hard, forcing down the burn in her throat as she stepped forward, the sharp click of her heels against the linoleum cutting through the heavy silence. She wasn't here to cry. She wasn't here to grieve. Not far behind, their cameras clicking like a swarm of vultures. The bright lights flashed in all directions, and for a moment, Isaiah felt like he was drowning in it, drowning in the weight of everyone's eyes, the scrutiny, the questions. He felt exposed, raw, like a carcass picked apart by hungry onlookers. Ava led him through the crowd, her steps quick and purposeful, but Isaiah could feel the tension radiating off her. She wasn't just walking out of there with him. She was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, the weight of an entire system that was stacked against them. The reporters shouted questions, but Ava kept moving, her voice low as she spoke to Isaiah. "Focus on breathing. Just keep moving." Isaiah nodded, his heart pounding, the reality of what had just happened pressing down on him like a 100-ton weight. He had no idea what would come next. He had no idea how much longer they could keep up this fight. But for now, Ava was fighting for him. She was the only thing that kept him tethered to anything resembling hope. They reached the car, and as Ava opened the door, Isaiah hesitated. His hand brushed against the doorframe, and for a moment, he looked back toward the precinct, the building that had swallowed him whole, the building that had almost taken everything from him. But as he turned, he saw something new in Ava's eyes. She wasn't just fighting to get him out anymore. She was fighting to make sure this didn't go unnoticed. She was fighting to make sure Malcolm's death wasn't in vain. And in that moment, Isaiah realized that even if he had to stand in front of the entire world, he wasn't alone. He climbed into the car, the door slamming shut behind him. The engine roared to life, and the car pulled away, leaving the chaos of the precinct behind. But Isaiah knew, deep down, the real fight was just beginning. The real fight would happen in the streets, in the courts, and in the hearts of every person who had ever been forced to watch their loved ones die without consequence. But Ava was right. They couldn't bury the truth, not if they had a choice, not while they had a voice, and Isaiah would make sure the world heard it. The car sped off, but in the back of his mind, the same question lingered. Would it be enough? Ava caught his gaze from the front seat, her expression steady. "We fight this, Isaiah, every step of the way. We're not stopping." Isaiah nodded, his throat tight, but his resolve hardening. "We fight." And for the first time since Malcolm's death, Isaiah felt a flicker of something inside him. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was something stronger, something that kept him breathing through the pain, something that reminded him he couldn't give up. Not now, not ever. The weight of the words hit Isaiah like a physical blow. "I feared for my life." Briggs's voice, calm, rehearsed, guilt-laden in just the right measure, poured out from the screen, and with it, something inside Isaiah cracked open. His fingers dug into his palms, nails pressing into his skin with a force that mirrored the rage bubbling beneath the surface. The absurdity of it, the audacity, the lies, they were so smooth, so calculated, as if everything they had done, everything that had been taken, was nothing but a routine. He looked at the screen, his eyes narrowing as Briggs stood there, spitting out his version of the truth with Reynolds beside him. They were calm, they were measured, they were untouchable, but they were liars. Isaiah felt a heat building, starting low in his chest, spreading out like wildfire, igniting every muscle, every nerve. His breath quickened, the familiar sting of helplessness threatening to suffocate him again, but this time, he wouldn't let it. He wouldn't let them win. "You don't get to hide behind that," Isaiah muttered under his breath, his voice trembling, barely a whisper in the quiet of the room. Ava was still on the phone, her voice firm, as she pressed for answers, demanding body cam footage, the thing they had promised and then withheld. Her voice rose with each passing second, frustration seeping through her words. But Isaiah couldn't hear her anymore. He could only see Briggs' face, that mask of indifference, that carefully constructed performance. It was the same face he had worn on the night Malcolm died, when he had stood there and taken a life without a second thought. And now, it was nothing more than a preemptive strike on the truth, a play for control of the narrative, a desperate attempt to cover up murder with polished lies. Ava's voice cut through his thoughts. "Isaiah, listen to me. We need—" But Isaiah was already on his feet, his chair scraping against the floor as he stood, his movements tight with rage, his fists clenched at his sides. The room felt too small, the air too thick, like he couldn't breathe without the weight of it crushing him. He turned to Ava, his eyes blazing, his voice shaking but strong. "They're not going to get away with this. They can't. I won't let them." Ava froze, her phone still pressed to her ear. For a moment, the world outside the room seemed to disappear. The flashes of news cameras, the reporters shouting their questions, it all fell away, leaving just her and him. She saw the fire in his eyes, the burning need for justice that had replaced the emptiness. She saw the shift, the first flicker of something other than despair. She stood, the chair scraping behind her as she put the phone down, her voice low but resolute. "We'll fight. We'll fight until they can't ignore us anymore. But first, we need to get you out of this mess. We need to make sure they don't bury this." Isaiah's breath came in quick, uneven bursts, but his voice was steady now, his resolve solidifying with each word. "I don't care how. Just make sure they know. They don't get to paint Malcolm as a threat. They don't get to erase him. I won't let them." Ava nodded, her hands steady as she pulled out another stack of documents, setting them down with sharp precision. The battle was far from over, and it wasn't just about getting Isaiah out anymore. It was about making sure the truth got out too. Isaiah sank back into the couch, his body tense, but his mind focused. The fight was just beginning, and no matter what it took, he wouldn't stop until Malcolm's name was heard, until the officers who had taken his brother's life faced the consequences. The system had failed him before, but it wasn't going to do it again. Not this time, disappearing into the night, leaving nothing but the echo of his footsteps in the stillness of the room. Ava stood frozen for a moment, her hand hanging in the air, the words she couldn't say swirling in her chest like a storm waiting to break. She felt the heaviness in her own heart, the frustration of not being able to fix this, not being able to shield him from the truth of what had happened, what had already been decided for them. Every part of her wanted to rush after him, to hold him, to make him see the light, to remind him that they were still in the fight, but the reality of the situation pressed against her ribs with a force she couldn't ignore. Ava closed her eyes briefly, taking a deep breath, steadying herself. She could feel the weight of the moment, the very real possibility that she was about to lose him too. He was so close to breaking, and she didn't know if she could pull him back from that edge. She had spent her life fighting the system, working within it, pushing against its immovable walls. But right now, she felt every crack in her own resolve, every doubt in her mind. Isaiah was right. Everything about this was rigged. The narrative had already been written, the officers' lives protected behind badges and lies, while Malcolm's was erased with every passing second. But Ava wasn't about to give up. She couldn't. Her fingers clenched into fists at her sides as she walked to the window, watching as Isaiah's figure disappeared into the distance. He had every right to feel this way, to want to tear everything down, to seek justice with his own hands. But Ava had a different plan, one that would take longer, one that might not yield results immediately, but one that would force the truth to come out, no matter the cost. The door creaked open behind her, and she didn't need to look to know who it was. Isaiah's absence hung heavily in the air, a palpable presence. Ava inhaled deeply and then turned around, her voice steady. "We'll get him back, Isaiah. We'll make them answer for what they did." But there was no response. The only sound now was the faint hum of the city outside, a harsh reminder that the world kept moving even as her world seemed to be falling apart. Outside the small, modest house, his breath coming in steady, controlled bursts. The street was quiet, too quiet, but that was good. No distractions, no noise, just him, and the mission. He had tracked Briggs here, watched the officer's routine for days, learned the small details that would give him an edge. Briggs came home at the same time every night, parked in the same spot, and walked up those 5 steps to the front door, like clockwork. Isaiah had already memorized the house, the surroundings, the rhythm. This was his moment, the moment he had been waiting for. His heart pounded in his chest as he stood just out of view, hidden in the shadows of a nearby tree. He could feel the tension in his body, the sharpness of his focus cutting through the night air. His fingers curled into fists, the adrenaline surging as he thought about what he was about to do. Briggs, Reynolds, these men had already destroyed lives. Malcolm's life, too many lives to count. But tonight, Isaiah was going to make them see the truth. He'd gathered everything, the body cam footage, the years of complaints, the stories of brutality and silence. He had seen the patterns, the systemic failures, the way the system had not just failed, but protected men like Briggs and Reynolds. And now it was time to hold them accountable. The house in front of him was quiet, the lights inside dim. Briggs had already gone inside for the night, but Isaiah didn't need much. He didn't need to confront him, not yet, not face to face. His eyes narrowed as he stood there, his mind working through the plan. The evidence he had wasn't just enough for the courts, it was enough to tear their lives apart. One phone call, one leak to the press, and everything they had built, everything they thought they had protected, would be exposed. The lies, the corruption, the bodies left in the street, everyone would know. And if that wasn't enough to make them pay, Isaiah had another plan. The weight of the information he had gathered was more than just data. It was the foundation of a movement, the spark of something far bigger than just his fight. The city, the nation, they couldn't ignore it. Not this time. He checked his watch. Briggs was inside now, probably sitting down to dinner or watching TV. Isaiah had already mapped out the escape routes, the places to be, the safe zones, every angle covered. But this wasn't about being careful. This wasn't about playing it safe. He wasn't going to wait for the system to hand him justice. He had seen the truth. He knew it. And now he was going to make sure the world knew it too. Isaiah took a deep breath, his chest expanding with a mix of determination and rage. He wasn't just doing this for Malcolm anymore. He wasn't just doing this for the hundreds of men who had been hurt by officers like Briggs and Reynolds. He was doing this for everyone who had ever been silenced, for every person who had been made invisible in the eyes of those who were supposed to protect them. He stepped forward, his hood still pulled up, his pace steady and sure. He knew the risk, the consequences of what he was about to do, but it didn't matter. The truth needed to be heard, and tonight, Isaiah Carter would make sure it was. Isaiah moved through the shadows, his eyes locked on Reynolds as the officer leaned back in his booth, laughing casually, unaware of the storm that was about to consume him. The anger that had flared in Isaiah's chest when he heard the officers mock Malcolm was now a controlled, razor-sharp focus. His body was loose, his steps silent, but inside, every muscle was wound tight, ready to spring. He had no intention of letting this go. The bar was small, low-lit, and unremarkable, the kind of place where men like Reynolds could laugh and drink without a care in the world. And Reynolds, even in civilian clothes, looked the same, relaxed, confident, unaware of the man standing just out of sight. Isaiah had seen enough. The smugness, the disregard, the casual dismissal of the life they'd taken, it was all too much. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they could do whatever they wanted, and it didn't matter. But Isaiah was done playing by the rules. The system had failed. Justice had failed. Now, he was going to take it into his own hands. He listened as the officers exchanged words. His hands clenched tighter as Reynolds spoke with too much satisfaction about what had happened that night. They didn't even care. They didn't think about the lives they ruined, the families they shattered. For them, it was just another case to handle, another inconvenient death that would be brushed under the rug. Isaiah's heart pounded in his chest, and a sickening feeling twisted in his stomach. The laughter, the casual cruelty, they were bragging about it. They were laughing like it had been a joke, like Malcolm's life had been nothing more than an inconvenience, easily erased. It was too much. It was too much to bear. His hands trembled as his fingers dug into the edge of the table, the anger bubbling up like a volcano, ready to erupt. He was so focused now, so consumed by the fire of revenge, that every other thought blurred away. The only thing that mattered now was making them pay. He stepped out of the bar into the cold night air, feeling the weight of it all. The world felt quieter now, as if the streets themselves were holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. Isaiah's jaw clenched as he breathed deeply, trying to steady himself. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about making them feel the same helplessness, the same fear that Malcolm had felt when they took his life, the same way they had torn him apart piece by piece until nothing was left but a body on the street, discarded and forgotten. Isaiah's mind raced as he formulated the plan. He'd studied them both, memorized their routines, their weaknesses, the way Reynolds left the bar alone every night, his cocky swagger, thinking nothing could touch him. The mistake was his, thinking he was invincible. Tonight, he wouldn't just make them pay. He would make them understand exactly what it felt like to be powerless, to be hunted, to be the prey. The decision was made, no hesitation, no second guessing. He knew what he had to do. He had the time, the space, the opportunity. Reynolds wouldn't see it coming. Isaiah checked the time again. He had 15 minutes before Reynolds would stumble out of the bar, buzzed but still steady enough to drive. He could do this. He would do this. And when he did, when Reynolds felt the cold edge of that fear, when he understood what it was like to be on the other side, Isaiah would finally make sure the world saw the truth they'd tried to bury, the truth they couldn't escape. It was time. Time for them to learn what it felt like to lose everything. Until he made Reynolds understand exactly what it felt like to be powerless, to be at the mercy of someone who had no respect for life or humanity. Reynolds was on his knees now, gasping for breath, his hands clutching at his midsection as he struggled to stay upright. Isaiah stood over him, breathing heavy, his body alive with rage, each second stretching out in the silence between them like an eternity. The officer's blood was smeared on the pavement, staining the night in ways that felt too real, too final. "You don't get to walk away from this," Isaiah growled, his voice cold and steady as his eyes locked on Reynolds, who was now glaring up at him, defiant but weak. Reynolds' face was contorted in pain, but there was still a flicker of arrogance behind his eyes, a spark of denial that this was happening to him. But it didn't matter anymore. Isaiah had already made up his mind. The truth needed to be heard, and it was no longer enough to let the system play its game. Reynolds tried to push himself up, his hands shaking, his knees buckling beneath him, but Isaiah kicked his legs out from under him, sending the officer crashing back to the ground. The sound of his body hitting the pavement echoed through the quiet parking lot. "You're not the one in control anymore?" Isaiah muttered, his voice hardening with each word. He grabbed Reynolds by the collar and yanked him back to his knees, their faces inches apart. "The narrative you've been telling yourself? The lies you've been spreading? It all ends tonight. You're going to remember my brother's name. You're going to remember what you did, and I'll make sure the world hears it too." Reynolds' lips trembled, blood dripping from his split mouth, his breathing ragged, but his defiance didn't fade. "You think this will change anything? You're just another black man taking justice into his own hands. You think that's going to make you a hero?" His voice cracked, and there was a flicker of fear in his eyes now. But it was too little, too late. Isaiah's eyes narrowed as he shoved Reynolds back, watching the officer struggle to keep himself upright. "This isn't about being a hero," he said coldly. "This is about making sure you never get to hurt anyone else again." Reynolds looked at him, his eyes wide with panic as he realized what was coming next. But Isaiah didn't hesitate. He stepped back, then lunged forward, his knee driving into Reynolds' ribs with a sickening crack. The officer gasped, his body jerking as he collapsed onto the ground, his head spinning from the pain. Isaiah stood over him, watching as the officer struggled to breathe, his chest heaving, his blood mingling with the street beneath him. "I'm not going to let you get away with it," Isaiah muttered, his voice low and full of finality. "Not now, not ever." Reynolds tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. His eyes were wide, his body trembling, but there was nothing left of the arrogant officer from before. There was only fear, fear of the man standing over him, the man he had once thought he could control. But now it was Isaiah who was in control, and the truth would be heard. Isaiah took one last look at the officer, his chest tight with the weight of everything that had led to this moment. The system had failed them, but Isaiah wasn't going to let it erase his brother, erase the truth. He wasn't going to let men like Reynolds and Briggs walk free. He turned and walked away, the sound of his boots steady on the pavement, his heart still pounding in his chest. But this time, there was no more fear, only the certainty that whatever came next, he would face it with the knowledge that justice had, for once, been in his hands. Isaiah stood over him, watching the panic flicker in Reynolds' eyes. The officer's body, once strong and in control, was now utterly useless. The look of realization was slow, creeping across his face, and for a moment, Isaiah felt something cold settle inside him. It wasn't satisfaction, it wasn't victory, it was something darker, something deeper. It was the confirmation that there was no going back. Reynolds tried to move, his body jerking as if to stand, to escape, but his legs wouldn't obey. He gasped, trying to scream, but no sound came. His throat constricted in a desperate panic, the realization of what had just happened crashing over him in waves. Isaiah watched as the officer's body struggled to do what it could no longer. A low, guttural sound escaped Reynolds' lips, but it was nothing more than a whisper of terror. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything. He was trapped in his own body, a prisoner of his own mistakes. The same way Malcolm had been trapped when they put him on the ground, when they had taken his life. Reynolds' fingers twitched weakly, the last sign of life he could muster before they went limp, falling to his side like dead weight. The panic in his eyes was undeniable, his breath shallow and ragged. Isaiah stepped back, his eyes cold and calculating. The weight of what he had done, of the irreversible act, hung heavily in the air. This wasn't just payback. This wasn't just about revenge. It was a reclamation of power. For years, men like Reynolds and Briggs had stolen lives, crushed souls, and used the weight of their badges to erase the truth. They thought they were untouchable. Isaiah wasn't just bringing them down. He was making them feel what it was like to be nothing, nothing more than a victim, helpless, terrified, and silenced. Just like Malcolm had been, just like every other man they had destroyed with their power. He glanced down at Reynolds, watching as the officer's chest heaved with shallow breaths, each one more desperate than the last. The weight of Isaiah's words, the ones he hadn't spoken, hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. "You wanted to know what fear felt like?" Isaiah's voice was low, almost contemplative. "Well, now you do." He turned and walked away, his footsteps steady and sure, leaving Reynolds to his fate. There was no turning back now. The system had failed. The truth had been buried. But tonight, Isaiah had taken control. Tonight he had made sure the lie would be shattered, piece by piece, until it was nothing but dust. As he stepped into the shadows, Isaiah didn't feel relief, didn't feel satisfaction. What he felt was something far deeper, something that would follow him for the rest of his life. The weight of a world broken, a system built to protect the guilty, and the ghosts of the men who had never had the chance to fight back. But for tonight, Isaiah had done what no one else would. And for the first time in a long time, He felt like maybe, just maybe, it was enough. A deep breath, his eyes closing for just a moment, as if letting the weight of the words, the weight of everything that had been building, settle into his bones. He knew it couldn't stop. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. Not after seeing what Reynolds had done to Malcolm, and feeling the same relentless anger in his chest with every breath. He was too far gone, too deep into this fight, and the only thing left was to see it through. Ava understood that, even if she didn't like it. "I know," he muttered, his voice low but firm, as he stepped further into the shadows. "I'm not stopping. I'm not turning back." Ava's silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. It wasn't just the resignation in her voice, it was the understanding that he was past the point of no return. He had made his choice, and there was no undoing it. Isaiah's grip tightened around his phone. He couldn't let her carry this burden too. She had already carried so much, and if Briggs thought he could threaten her, think he could use her to get to him, he was wrong. "I'm coming for him," Isaiah said, his voice colder now. "I'm going to make him feel the same fear he tried to put into you. He's going to know exactly what it feels like to be hunted. And this time, it's not just for Malcolm. It's for everyone he's ever hurt." Ava didn't respond immediately, but Isaiah could feel her presence even through the phone. The weight of her understanding, the care she had always shown, even now when she knew the danger he was walking straight into. "Be careful," she finally said, her voice quiet, but the strength in it unmistakable. "Please." Isaiah's heart clenched at the simple plea, the way she never asked him to stop, never asked him to give up, but only to stay safe. She knew what he was capable of, but she also knew the cost. "I will," he said, not because he was sure, but because it was the only thing he could offer her in this moment. He couldn't promise he would come back from this, couldn't promise anything except that he would keep fighting, that he would finish what he had started. And as he disconnected the call, Isaiah stepped further into the night, blending with the shadows as he made his way toward the next move. He would find Briggs. He would make him understand. The world might have moved on, but for Isaiah, there was only one path forward, one final reckoning, and he wouldn't stop until it was done. Into his voice as his hands scrambled uselessly against the pavement, trying to push himself up, trying to move away. But Isaiah's boot kept him down, his weight pressing him into the ground. "No choice?" Isaiah repeated, his voice low and full of contempt. "You made a choice, didn't you? The same choice you made when you held my brother down, when you shot him in the street. That wasn't a mistake, Briggs. That was a choice. And now you're going to feel every ounce of that." Briggs's eyes flickered, wide with panic, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The arrogance, the unshakable confidence that had once defined him was gone. What remained was a broken man, gasping for air, his face twisted with fear and pain. The same fear that he had put into every man he ever targeted, every life he had destroyed, was now choking him. Isaiah's jaw clenched as he loomed over the officer. Every muscle in his body was taut, coiled with rage. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment where the predator finally became the prey. "I don't care what you think you had to do," Isaiah growled. "You chose to take a life. You chose to put Malcolm down like he didn't matter. But he mattered, and I'm here to make sure you understand that." Briggs's hands were trembling now, his bloodshot eyes desperately searching Isaiah's face, looking for mercy that would never come. He coughed again, a weak attempt to speak, but Isaiah wasn't listening. He wasn't waiting for an apology. He wasn't looking for anything but justice. Isaiah's fist connected with Briggs' face once more, the sharp sound of bone meeting flesh echoing through the night air. Briggs's head snapped back with the force, his body crumpling to the ground like a rag doll. Blood pooled beneath his face, staining the asphalt dark. Do you hear that? Isaiah's voice was a hiss laced with venom. That's the sound of you paying for what you did. You killed my brother. Now you get to feel the weight of it. Briggs groaned weakly, still on the ground, but he was done. His eyes flickered with fear and then nothing. Just the empty stare of a man who understood he was out of time, out of options. Isaiah stepped back, breathing heavily, his body humming with the aftermath of what he had just done. His hands were still clenched into fists, but his eyes were cold. The rage had subsided, replaced with something else now, something quieter, something final. "Get up," Isaiah ordered, his voice cold, commanding. "Get up and walk away." But Briggs didn't move. He was broken, his body bent, his spirit crushed. He had no fight left in him. He had been brought to his knees, just as he had put so many others. Isaiah turned away from him, walking back to his car. He knew this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. Not until Briggs, and every man like him, was held accountable. But tonight, for the first time, Isaiah had made sure that one of them would never walk again. The city still buzzed with life around him, but Isaiah felt something shift in the air, something that could never be undone. He had made a choice too, and just like Briggs had learned, that choice would haunt him forever. For the moment when it would finally be extinguished, but it wasn't going to be by the death of a man. Not yet. Briggs lay before him, broken, his body a mess of blood and bruises, his arrogance stripped away, his smirk, the one that had never wavered in the face of countless victims, was gone. All that remained was fear. The fear of a man who had finally realized he wasn't untouchable. And for a brief, fleeting second, Isaiah felt the weight of the moment settle in. This man, this officer, had terrorized families, ruined lives, all under the protection of his badge. Now, he was nothing more than a shell, a victim of his own actions. Isaiah's breath remained steady, but his eyes were cold, unyielding. The man in front of him might have been begging for mercy in his own way, but Isaiah wasn't going to give it. Not to a man like Briggs. "You don't get to hurt anyone ever again," Isaiah muttered, his voice low, like a final warning. Briggs' eyes were barely open, the fight drained out of him, but there was still that small, twisted arrogance lurking beneath the pain, like a stubborn ember refusing to die. His lips trembled, blood staining his teeth, but he managed a raspy chuckle. "You think you're winning? You think you're some kind of hero?" He spat, his voice shaky but laced with disdain. "You're nothing but another thug playing vigilante. You think they're going to let you get away with this?" Isaiah crouched down once more, his gaze never leaving Briggs. The officer's body twitched weakly, but there was no fight left in him. Just the desperate breaths of a man who had been broken, who had realized his power had crumbled. The law, the system, all the protection he'd had for so long. It was gone. "You're right," Isaiah whispered, his voice cool but his tone cutting. "This isn't justice. It's what happens when the system fails. It's what happens when men like you are allowed to keep taking, to keep hurting people with no consequence. You've already made your bed, Briggs. You just didn't think you'd ever have to lie in it." A brief flicker of panic crossed Briggs' face, the thought of the consequences of his own arrogance starting to sink in. But it wasn't enough. There was no turning back now. Isaiah had already sealed the deal, and Briggs knew it. Isaiah's lips twitched just slightly as he straightened up. He stood over the broken man for a moment, watching him struggle, gasping, trying to grasp at something that no longer existed. For a second, Isaiah felt nothing but the weight of it all, the rage, the grief, the loss. But then he felt something more, a quiet sense of finality. This wasn't just a fight. It wasn't even vengeance anymore. This was the price. "You'll die with this on your conscience," Isaiah said, his voice steady, as if speaking about something final. He turned away, his eyes sweeping over the night, his body humming with purpose. He knew he wouldn't be walking out of this night unscathed, but that was never the point. Not anymore. The silence around him felt like a breath caught in time. Isaiah's fists were still clenched at his sides, his body still tense, but he didn't stop. The world had already begun moving in a different direction, one that didn't allow men like Briggs to stand unchallenged. Isaiah turned his back on him, his eyes narrowing as he walked away. Tonight, the predator had become the prey, and it was Briggs who would bear the weight of it. The fire inside Isaiah hadn't burned out. It had just shifted into something else, something that demanded change, something that would keep fighting even when it seemed like there was nothing left. He wasn't done, not yet, not until every man who had been crushed by the system saw their day of reckoning, and neither was Briggs. Thank you for sharing that powerful and emotional story. It's gripping, raw, and intense, showing the depths of Isaiah's pain and his relentless pursuit of justice. His journey, full of loss, vengeance, and ultimately finding some form of closure, is masterfully woven together. I hope your audience will feel the weight of this narrative and reflect on its profound themes. If you need help with more writing, editing, or developing future content, feel free to reach out.